All right, hello everybody. I'm just testing first with my colleagues to make sure the video and the audio is fine. I think it is. First thing, before even introducing myself, I'm going to ask you to please keep the microphone off throughout the presentation. We're going to have a presentation about 20-30 minutes, and I will really appreciate that because every time there is someone speaking, it will bother everybody who is listening to the presentation. We're later going to have a question and answer session where we can interact, but during the presentation I really appreciate that you keep your microphone off throughout the session. Okay, so once again, welcome everybody. We have people joining from literally all over the world today for this session on the application process on consultative status with ECOSOC. And I really want to thank you for the interest, not only on the webinar itself, but also on the application process and on participating with ECOSOC through this mechanism, the consultative status. My name is Diego Rumiani. I work here in the NGO branch in the UN headquarters in New York. And I'm going to be conducting this presentation. So basically what we're going to be doing is for 20-30 minutes, I'm going to tell you a bit about the process. I'm going to be discussing first what is consultative status for those of you that are not so familiarized with the process and with the benefits and who is eligible, who is not eligible, and these type of things. The second thing I'm going to talk about is the application process itself, which I know from the people who registered to this event, many people. We have different group of people. Some people already register and they already apply for consultative status. Some people are in the process of applying, and some people are considering applying. So we'll try to cover all these three audiences as much as possible in a general way, and then we'll open for questions. The third thing we are going to talk about is the application package. So we're not going to go very much in detail of the application package because that will take us much more time. But we are going to go through the system. We're going to show you even how the system looks like for application, and you will see the screens and the documentation that you're going to be needing for submitting an application for consultative status. Then after that, there's going to be a question and answer session. I'll try to, we have basically an hour for the entire event, but I'll see if I can extend it a little bit if there are more questions from the audience. Important thing in terms of the Q&A, we're going to be some interaction. So I'm going to give the floor to some of the NGO representatives, that you're joining. But I also encourage you to submit questions in writing. That will be very helpful for us because sometimes we can compile as I go along in the presentation, and we can answer these questions directly. In order to do that, you have to send a message to everyone, and basically this question will be collected by our colleagues here, and then I will read the question. I'll try to read as many questions as we can with the time we have, and also have some interactions with you throughout the process. So you can write these questions if you want, starting right now. I will be collecting these questions. That doesn't preclude me from doing the presentation, so you feel free to do that throughout the presentation. All right, so I think I mentioned most of the administrative aspect of this workshop. I'll now move into the presentation. So the first thing I want you to understand is the idea of consultative status. I mean, consultative status is a mechanism that was created back in 1996 through an ECOSOC resolution 1996-31, by which a new possibility for civil society to interact with NGOs was established. There are other mechanisms in the UN, but this is the only one that gives the opportunity for NGOs to really interact with member states in intergovernmental processes. So the Economic and Social Body is one of the bodies of the United Nations, and this body allows open the doors to civil society to interact in these meetings. There are different ways in which you can interact. The first thing is I will call the formal mechanisms of interactions, which involves first of all the possibility of submitting statements, either written statements or oral statements or presentations that NGOs can give during these meetings in ECOSOC, as well as attending the sessions. NGOs in consultative status get a ground pass to attend sessions of ECOSOC in New York, but also in Geneva and in Vienna. So NGOs can get this accreditation and attend these sessions in which they can deliver this statement or just attend the session itself. There are other mechanisms that we call it more informal mechanisms, and these are really mechanisms related to interaction and networking with UN staff or different member states, the representatives, agencies, UN agencies, and in general, and even other NGOs that are attending the sessions. So this will give you really an opportunity for you to exchange ideas, to exchange your projects, and to share these projects to a big audience at the international level. That's really also a very good opportunity that NGOs really appreciate after getting consultative status. In some of these meetings, you can also share your stories or organize side events together with these meetings for different commissions that ECOSOC has throughout the year. So consultative status became a very important mechanism for NGOs to participate in ECOSOC and to have real participation. So it's not only attending but also contributing to have a voice in these meetings. For the first time, I think starting in April, we reached 5,000 NGOs that are right now in consultative status with ECOSOC. That's a big number. Many of these NGOs are in New York, but we have also in Geneva and Vienna that are attending, but these NGOs are distributed throughout the world. And they can participate not only by attending the sessions, but also communicating with them through written statements, so their voice can channel through these intergovernmental processes. So this is the benefits about having consultative status. It's very important. I always tell NGOs that you really see your NGO and really see if you are at the stage where you're ready to participate on this at this level, whether your interest is aligned with the interest of the UN on this particular aspect or of ECOSOC, if you have the mechanisms, the resources, and the capacity to do this. NGOs have different, they have different ways in which they can participate. So you really need to see in the application process what you're going to be contributing to ECOSOC. Okay, we're going to talk about more in the application process itself, but this is something that you really want to communicate. How the organization, yourself, are going to be contributing to the work of ECOSOC. So this is really, really important. So we can talk more about the benefits. The resources I recommend you for this is for preparing your application is to go to the ECOSOC website to familiarize yourself with that process and what ECOSOC does. Because this is something that you want to really align the work of your organization with what ECOSOC is doing. So the ECOSOC website you can is a good source. Also, our website csonet.org, which I'm going to show you in a few minutes, it's another good source for material for instructions, but also to understand what consultative status is. Let's now move a little bit on the application process. So the application process, basically we receive applications throughout the year. There is technically no deadline, even though there is this June 1st deadline, but technically there is no deadline in the sense that we can receive applications throughout the year. However, it's very important to notice that June 1st is important because applications that are going to be received by June 1st included, are going to be reviewed by the Committee on NGO, which is one of the committees of ECOSOC, during 2019. So if you submit an application today, let's say, and you really press the submit button today, then the application will have this path. First of all, the NGO branch, where I work, will look at your application, and we basically try to see if the documentation is complete, if we have questions about your application, if we think there are different issues that we would like to ask you or to understand better about your organization. So this is like an initial review that the NGO branch does. If that is fine, then the application is submitted to the Committee on NGO, who will have basically the responsibility of recommending your organization for consultative status. The committee meets twice a year. In January, we call that the regular session, and in May, which is basically coming up in a couple of weeks, the May session or the resume session of the committee. So either one or the other session, your applications are going to be reviewed. So if you submit an application now, we're going to ask you questions. If we are clarified about the organization and we notice that all the documentation and all the elements are complete, then we submit this to the committee. The committee will meet either in January or May, will look at your applications, and of course the best thing that could happen to you is that everything is clear, that there are no questions, and if that happens, they recommend you for consultative status, and that's it basically. You got the recommendation. However, it could happen that member states that are in this committee, there are 19 member states from different regions of the world. So they have questions about your application. So in those cases, these countries will really go and ask you these questions. You have the possibility to respond within a certain period. It's very important during that time that you have your email checked periodically, that your email is updated. You don't want to miss those questions. And if you answer the questions to the satisfaction of the committee, again, you get recommended. So that's a positive outcome. If the question is not answered to the satisfaction, or the committee doesn't have time to really answer those questions, to really review these answers you provided, well, in those cases, the committee will have to defer consideration of your application until the next session. So for instance, if you submitted, if your application was reviewed in January and your case cannot be resolved in January, then you will be reviewed in May. And hopefully in May you will have an answer to those questions. It's very important that you are there, available with your email addresses. You don't have to travel to New York. This can be done completely remotely, but that you are receiving the question and that your answer as soon as possible. So there are more chances for your application to be considered on time, and you can get your consultative status earlier. Assuming you are recommended by the Committee on NGOs for consultative status, you have to remember that this is a recommendation, which means that the recommendation, the council that operates as an intergovernmental body will have to meet to look at this recommendation and grant you status. So the committee recommends status, but the council, the Economic and Social Council, the plenary body, is the one that is going to be granting you status. For applications that are considered by the committee in January, April is the moment in which you're going to be considered by the council and eventually granted status. For applications reviewed in May, the date will be July. So in July, you're going to be granted consultative status. That means that the fastest you can get status, you can already figure out from the dates I gave you, is assuming that you go to January, which is the earliest moment in next year. If you apply today, the earliest you can get it is in April. That means that in April, you're officially in consultative status, assuming everything goes well, there are no questions, there are no delays. April, you will get consultative status, April 2019. And at that moment, we communicate that to you, and you will enjoy all the privileges of having consultative status, which means you will get ground passes for you and for your representatives, and you will be able to participate in all the meetings of ECOSOC from that moment on. Two things I want to mention about the consultative status that I didn't mention before. I think it's important to know because some NGOs may be interested on this. First, all NGOs that are getting consultative status, they have not only all these privileges that I mentioned before, but also the obligation of submitting what we call quadrennial reports. So reports that are mandatory to be submitted every 4 years. I'm not going to talk into this because this is something that you will eventually learn when you get a status, but this is an obligation. NGOs that are not reporting their activities every 4 years, they will first be suspended and eventually withdrawn their consultative status. So this is a very important duty that all NGOs have with regards to ECOSOC. This is, again, this is not just an association with the UN, but this is you have a role here. You have an obligation to tell us what you've been doing as part of your consultative status. The other aspect, which I'm not going to dwell so much about it, because in our office here in New York, we work mostly with the Economic and Social Council, but I still want to stress is that consultative status is also useful for participating in the Human Rights Council. And I'm sure on the other side, there are many NGOs that are involved in the Human Rights Council, or they're actually interested to be involved in the Human Rights Council. I will not be able to answer so many questions about that because I'm not working directly with it, but this is another opportunity you have. Consultative status allow you to access that, as well as other areas of the UN that are not falling exactly within ECOSOC, because consultative status of the year became really the main platform for participation in the UN. It became the mechanism for accessing different areas. Many offices in the UN start using consultative status as a way of accessing their particular activity. So that's another benefit. Consultative status is growing. So having consultative status is very important for you even to participate in areas that may not be strictly ECOSOC, which is what consultative status was created for. So you may want to have that in mind, and again, be very aware of what is the area you want to participate. Okay. So the last point I want to make, the last section, is the application package. One thing I didn't say is that there is some eligibility requirements for consultative status. Maybe you already saw that in our website. I think the main one I should say is that ECOSOC, that NGOs should be in existence for more than 2 years at the moment of applying for consultative status. That's a very important requirement. So you will need to present, one of the documents you need to present is a proof of existence that you have been in existence, that is issued by governmental authority, and that you have more than 2 years in existence. This document is very important because that's the way in which we will see if you're eligible or not. So that's a very important eligibility requirement. There are others as well. They're in the website, but basically that your organization follow a democratic process for selecting their authorities, that the organization is non-governmental, so basically you are not a governmental entity, and that you maintain independence from the government in terms of the government does not influence in your decision-making process. We'll see in the applications there are several questions that try to understand how your organization works within that, how the organization, if collaborating with the government, which is totally fine, how this independence is maintained. So that's another important area. So without getting so much into those details, I want to have some time to show you the application process, at least how it looks like, and probably mention some other things as I go along that. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch to our website. Hopefully you all will be able to see it. Oops, sorry about that. Okay, I'm asking my colleagues here to see if the screen is visible. So hopefully it's visible for everybody. So this is csonet.org. You can see that here. And this is basically the homepage of our website. You probably know this because many people find out about this webinar through this website. Here you can find a lot of information. I really recommend our booklet on working with ECOSOC, which basically is a summary of what we are seeing in this presentation, but contains much more information. I'm sorry about that. Sorry. And yes, and that to explore, one of the important things on the application process is knowledge about ECOSOC. You want to show that you already know as soon as you get consultative status what you're going to do with it, even though there are going to be a lot of course, learning curve in your understanding of ECOSOC and in working and interacting with the UN. You want to show in your application that you already have, at least at a very basic level, what you want to do with the consultative status. That increase your chances of your application, decrease the chances of questions from us or from member states, of committee members. So it's very, very important. From here, I'm going to show you first this link, apply for consultative status. And here you have the step-by-step process of how to apply. I'm not going to go through it now. You will have time to read it and get into the details of it. The only thing I'm going to be doing now is from here show you an application that I prepare with just generic information. So you look how it looks like and what is the components. I'm going to go through the components of it. So from here, I'm going to log in into my profile, which I created. A profile is basically the information, the basic information about your organization. So I'm going to be using this. So I'm putting my username and password, and again, all these links are coming from the website, so you will have all the instructions there how to get here. Remember, it's csonet.org, apply for consultative status. And all right, so from here I can see that I have an incomplete application because I didn't submit it. So here you will see how the application looks like. I'm going to go into the application that I'm working on, and here is what the application looks like. Again, this is just random text, so please don't pay attention to that. What I want you to understand is the structure and what you need to prepare. So what you need to prepare here is answers to 3 sections of questions. There is a general section which asks questions about the organization in general, and basically it's the substantive part of the application, what the organization does, how it's planning to contribute to ECOSOC, about their projects and activities. This is, I like to say that this is one of the most important questions you'll have to respond, because this is where you show that you are not just signing in ECOSOC, but you are ready to contribute. And this is how you're going to show how you're going to do that. Member states look at that very carefully because they want to see what your role will be in the UN and particularly in the work of ECOSOC. So you have 7 questions that try to tackle about these issues: participation in UN conferences, projects, etc. It's what the NGO is, what is the nature of the NGO. The second set of questions, we call it registration and structure, shows is 8 to 21, question 8 to 21, shows different questions about more the operational aspects of the UN and the logistics of the organization. So it talks about the registration, where it's operating, the geographical coverage of the NGO, how it's established, if the organization is national or international or regional, the decision-making process, the membership of the organization, how it works with members, if there is any particular membership rule that we should be aware of, how it relates with other NGOs, that's also very important to understand, and if the relationship with the government, which I mentioned before. Relationship with the government is fine as long as you can prove independence from it. So here in question 19 in particular, that's where it's explained, and this is very important if you have any to comment. In general, the general rule on the application form, in filling out this form, is to put detailed information as much as you can. There is a limit, but as much as you can, you have plenty of space to put information about, if you mention projects, you want to describe the details of these projects, the outcome of this project, the results obtained. If you want to talk about relationship with other NGOs, you want to mention the names of the NGOs, where they are located, what kind of relationship you have. So always try to think of potential questions that you may receive, because you don't want to receive those. You want that information to be upfront. So try to think in that way in trying to fill out the application form. The third section is the income and expenditure section, and now we move into finance. So in the financial aspects of the application, here is also an area that committee members look at very carefully. And here you see for 1 year, what is your income and expenditure that you have. It is very important that you fill out, again, this in detail. NGOs committee members wants to see if you're operating with a surplus or a deficit. They want to see how you get the money, so from which sources. That's very important areas, because that determine who is funding the organization, and how you're spending that money, so in which projects. It's very important that you focus on projects and not so much in administration. Actually, it provides here an instruction on how to that you should not exceed 30%. You want to see that your money is going mostly on projects, not on administration, which could be salaries or other aspects. So it's very important that you explain and you try to show this in your financials. The other aspects, then there is a summary section where you have to fill out additional information, but it's just numbers. So this is a bit of a conclusion of the application, so I'm not going to get into it. The other important aspects are the documents. So the application package is composed of of an application form and 3 required documents that you have to present. And I'm going to now talk about these documents. So the application form, we already saw it. It's a lot of questions you have to answer and that you want to answer in detail. There are 3 required documents that you have to upload through our website in this particular screen. And this is one I actually already mentioned, is the proof of existence or certificate of registration. We don't like to call it certificate because it's not always a certificate. It depends on country. The important thing is it has to prove that it has 2 years of existence, and it has to be issued by a governmental authority, either at the national, provincial, or state, or municipal level. But it has to be issued by a government. And this document basically will say that your organization has been established in a particular year, which will be 2 years earlier than the moment in which you are applying. The other document is the constitution. In some countries that is called bylaws or statutes or charter. And this document, which is the second one here, is a document that contains your decision-making process. In order for the committee to assess whether you have a democratic process, how members are elected, how meetings and how decisions are made in the organization, we need to see this constitution. So as long as we have the government and try to answer some, and then we'll interact with some of you. Okay, so I have a question here. Let me see. Okay, so the interesting question I have here is it's true there is a question that talk about membership. The question is, could you give examples of what is meant in the question of, do you have membership with any other UN agencies? What might be examples of that? So there are other type of memberships that organizations can have with other UN entities. For instance, UNESCO, I know that they have the UNESCO clubs, that you can be part of it, and or you can be even a UNESCO club yourself. So this is a type of membership you may have. There is another type of association with the UN that is also very popular, that is called the DPI Association. DPI stands for Department of Public Information. Maybe many of you are already associated with that. That's something that you would like to tell us, that you have to answer in this question, that you already have this membership, which gives you, if you want, an edge in the sense that you already have been interacting with the UN, and that you have been participating in some events that DPI give you access to. So these are the type of things, and there are many others, that you may already have these type of memberships. And the important thing is that you disclose that you mention these things. Another thing I will mention about this is that all the information you provide is very important if you have a website to be equally reflected in the websites, in the sense that there are not contradictions between what you put in the website, in your website, and the application package. More and more member states, committee members are looking at your website as well, and even asking you questions from what they see in the website, not only what they see in the application. So you want these two to be in sync, so there's no confusion for member states. Let me jump to another question. Let me see. The question is, can we apply in French? I already answered that part, but probably that question was answered before. They ask about the question, to repeat the question about obligation, because apparently it was not clear, that part of obligations of consultative status. So the obligations are basically the presentation of this quadrennial report. Every 4 years, the organization has to submit a report that describes the activities of the UN, of the organization, in relation to the UN or not in relation to the UN, activities that the organization did for the last 4 years. This is an obligation in the sense that if you don't submit this after a particular deadline, you will get first suspended from your status and then eventually withdrawn. Basically, you will lose your status. So it's important that this is a mandatory aspect of your application. Let me see, I will take another question and then I'll go to the floor. Let me see. So they ask here, what level of details do we need in income and expenditure? And so the level of details, I will say, I encourage you to be very detailed there. I encourage you to really provide a breakdown. So if you put a line that says, I receive income for a particular group of donors, and you just put one line there with a significant number, in relation to the total budget of your organization, that you try to break that down, to put the different donors or the different sources. There are a lot of questions asked by committee members about opening up those lines. Some NGOs, unfortunately, present very little information, just a few lines, and this doesn't give the idea of where, in the case of income, for instance, where this money is coming from, but also in the case of expenditure, of how many, in which projects or in which particular activities you are distributing those funds. So it's important that you try to open up that as much as possible. The income expenditure section also have a section at the end that it has comments, and I always encourage NGO to write there things that maybe cannot be explained so well in a table, but could be explained there. So you can, for instance, there explain, well, we have a surplus this year because we receive a money for a multi-year project. So basically we are reflecting the income of that money in this particular year, but this is money that is going to be used, I don't know, in 2 years or 3 years. So these type of remarks are always encouraged to try to not to wait to the committee members to ask the question, which could eventually lead to the deferral of your application, but to really answer the question before the committee actually has it. Then the other aspect of it is let me see. Sorry, I got okay. The other question, sorry, I was trying to track the other question from this person. Do any of these documents need to be notarized? What we need, the constitution and financial statement, definitely we don't need any legal mark. So basically a financial statement you can prepare in the way you usually prepare, as long as it has the information which we need, which is a balance sheet and an income statement. As long as we have this basic information to address any particular any financial assessment of the organization is fine with us. The same with the Constitution. What we look in the Constitution is not a specific format. We look a description of the governance structure and decision-making process in as much detail as you can present it. The certificate is different because there we need a proof of existence. So this has to be issued by a governmental authority, which means that we need to see that it was issued. We don't need a notarization of that document per se. So we don't need a third party that certifies that. We need to have the document that, in most cases, governmental authorities give to NGOs to certify that you are an NGO, that you are established, that you are operating legally, and from which year. And a particular footnote here is that in some countries, these documents are not issued. In some countries, NGOs are able to operate without this particular certificate. We still need a proof of existence issued by a government, and in those cases, for instance, and this is just an example, it doesn't mean that you have to really come up with it. A tax authority usually record NGOs, for instance, certificate of tax exemption. That also could work because this is issued by a governmental authority and it proves your existence, even though we're really not interested about the tax status of your organization. This is not something we look in this application, but it could help in as a proof of existence. All right, I'll stop with these questions now, and I will move to the people. So I will ask whoever has a question to, and sorry, I should have asked this before, to raise your hand. And yeah, so just you have a button there with a hand, and you can press that if you have a question, and if I didn't answer it already, and I will give the floor to you. Okay, so I see some hands here already. Okay, so I'm gonna give the floor. Okay, I have someone named Hadasha Somosi. I'm asking my colleague to Hadasha with H-A-D-A. Okay, so yeah, you have the floor. Sorry. I'm sorry, I didn't hear it from the very beginning, so if you can just repeat.
Hi.
Hi, how are you?
Good evening. We're working on our application, and there's a lot of focus on what the overall organization is doing and involved in. And because we are a large organization, and we have a very specific niche that we feel could contribute to ECOSOC as a consultancy or nonprofit, we're wondering where is the place that we should be focusing on what the particular project addresses. We find that we're not sure where we should elaborate on that because a lot of the information is questions about the general overall organization. How can you help me with that?
Okay, so this is common. I mean, large organizations apply, and maybe there is a particular area within the organization that is the one particularly interested in contributing to ECOSOC, or is going to be more active in the interaction with the UN. I will mention two things to consider. So the first thing is, if you want to call it the legal aspect of it. So what the important thing is that, and we receive sometimes organizations that maybe a particular area of the organization apply independently. That's not going to work unless you apply as the total entity, because usually the total entity is the one that will be able to prove existence with a government authority and is the one that as a whole is legally registered to operate in the country. So the important thing is that the entire organization, unless a particular division could have a separate identity or separate legal identity, will apply. Now, the second aspect of it is if you're applying as a whole organization, yes, all the questions about what the organization is will have to be about the entire organization, not about the particular area within the organization, because this is the organization that is applying, and the consultative status will be granted to the entire organization. So basically anybody from the organization, if granted status, will be able to, according to the organization rules, be able to access, to use the consultative status. Having said that, however, what I usually recommend is if there is a particular area that is working, there are some questions, a particular question 5A that talks about how do you plan to contribute to ECOSOC, to stress the fact that there is a particular area in the organization that is the one that is going to be more involved. Because you want to really show to the committee that even though the entire organization is applying, this is the area that is going to be active in the UN. Which area will that be? That's up to the organization, of course, which area believes is more related to the work of the council, and where the organization also is going to put resources, or is going to be destined to work with ECOSOC on that. That's totally up to the organization. But you want to indicate that in the application. However, you have to remember that the application is on behalf of the entire organization, and the committee has to have clear about that. I don't know if that answered your question. Yeah, if I can get the floor back. Yes, you're back on.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so I'm gonna pick another one. Okay, I'm gonna get Mariela Hernandez. You have the floor now.
Yeah, hello. I'm here. I am Sergio. I'm with Mariela, and the question is, in which way the council, the members, the country members of the council, take the decision whether or not they accept the NGO, the ECOSOC.
Okay, thank you for your question. So the council basically, we said, is the last step of the process, right? The committee is the one recommending, and of course the decision is based on your application. It's based on what information they see, and in the questions that they may have, and the way you answer to these questions. And of course, they look at several factors in the committee. Now, the council, which is your question, basically what it does is going to look at the recommendation of the committee. And I would say, I mean, if you look at the history of the committee and the relationship with the council, you will see that after you get a recommendation for the committee, it's very unusual. Unusual means that sometimes it happens, but it's very unusual that the council will not follow that recommendation and not grant consultative status. So, for instance, in this last April, I think with the exception of a few, 2 or 3 NGOs, all the organizations that were more like, I don't know, 200 or something like that, were recommended, were granted status because they were recommended for the committee. So really the committee, which is the session that occurs in January and May, is the decisive moment of your consultative status. However, there is this gap of time until the council meets in which you really don't have, you've been recommended, but you really don't have yet consultative status. I hope this answers your question.
Yes, gracias, Diego.
De nada. Okay. Now, okay, let me see another question from the ones you wrote. Try to alternate to really, we receive a lot of questions, so I try to really address. Let me see. Okay, I think this is an interesting question. The question is, if an NGO officially changes its name, when does the 2 years period of activities begin? When the original registration date or the date when the name is registered? We have cases like this. It's pretty common that NGOs, of course, change their name for whatever reasons. I'm not going to get into the reasons, but they do change their name. So the important thing in cases of change of name is if the change of name happened before 2 years ago, it's not a problem. Basically, you show us the last name you have, which is the name under which you're going to apply, and that's going to be the name that you're going to be following. Now, the problem is when the change of name happened within these 2 years, because you want to use the new name, you want to apply under the new name, but you still want to prove existence of 2 years. So in those specific cases, you may need to provide more than one document. So, for instance, if your organization name was A, and you in, let's say, 2010, but in 2017, last year, you changed it to B, you need to present two documents. One of existence of A, and another one that proves the change of name from A to B. Both documents should be issued by governmental authorities, and in that case, we will be able to, you will be able to apply under the name B, under the new name. Otherwise, we will not accept the new name if you cannot prove this continuity. We want to make sure that the organization B is really the continuation of A and not another organization. So we do this type of checks. Of course, this could get more complicated. You may have more changes of name, or you can be in different geographical locations. I'm not going to get here into all the possibilities. If you have a specific question about that, what I just said is the most common one. You can send us a question, and we will be able to really explain in your particular situation. Let me see another. Another question. Okay, this is another common case that I think it will be good. We are research and advocacy center that is housed within a university in a faculty of law. How do we prove the date the center was launched? There is no governmental certification available since the center is not legally, from the point of view of the government, legally distinct from the university. So this is very common, and it's in a way related to the question about I did before, we addressed before, of NGOs that are a particular area of the NGO that is contributing and not the total NGO. In this case, in universities and in general in education centers, we have particular centers, institutes that want to apply, but they don't have the legal identity. So I don't have great news, but I have some news that there are some ways of doing this. One way is to get this legal identity. Some institutes were able to do that. They were able to register independently from the university with the authorities, and they created, if you want, a separate entity. I know that's not always possible within the main entity, and I know that might not be an option, but for some organizations, for some institutes are to get their own identity. I would say if that is possible, that's the best option, because you apply as a separate NGO and you fill out the whole form, and you really have recognition as what you really are, which is that institute or center. The other option, which is also some institutes did, is to have a specific university to apply for consultative status. And this looks like the case we discussed before, in which the whole entity apply, even though a particular faculty or particular center will be participating. Of course, as I mentioned before, the whole university will be applying, which means that information has to be about the whole university, and the documentation will have to be about the university, which is the one that has the legal identity, and the ones under the name under which it's going to apply. I know for some organization, from some institute, these two options are the same as none, because it's really not possible. But unfortunately, we have the restriction that we want the entity that is applying to be registered under that name. The proof of existence that you are providing has to match always with the name under which you're applying. That's something that we check in order to prove your identity. So it is the practice that we need to make sure that these two things match, and that you are really the entity that is given a status is the entity that is going to be working on it. And in order to prove its existence, we need this governmental check. So this is the two ways in which we have been doing. We have cases, if you look at NGOs already in status of entire universities applying. There are not many, but they are. And we have cases of institutes applying that are working within universities because they were able to secure this individual identity. So that could be the two solutions we have. Of course, we can, if you have questions about the specific of this particular institute, of this question that you wrote, you can send us a message and we can discuss it. But this is basically the two most common options in which we have been dealing with this issue. Okay, I'm going to take one question from the floor. Let me see. We have some hands here raised. Okay, I'll give the floor with someone. Caldairo. C-A-L.
You hear me?
Yeah, now I hear you.
Yeah.
You have the floor.
Okay, thank you very much. I understood from question 21 of the form that you expect that we send 2 recommendation letters from particular people or organizations that the NGO works with, and I did not see or, and a letter of recommendation of UN entity with which the NGO would have an existing partnership. Could you elaborate, explain us that? From our point of view, we don't have any at this stage any partnership with a UN organization. Is it compulsory or not? And what about the 2 other regulators? Am I clear on that?
Yes, you are. Thank you very much for the question. However, in the question 21, I'm going to look at it right now, but there is no request for a particular letter of recommendation. Actually, the question 21 is about the work with the UN, I think. Let me quickly see. There is a question about who the organization work with, and which NGOs they work with, or which areas of the UN they are already working, or if they have a particular affiliation with members, with UN agencies. But which, of course, if you have, you're encouraged to explain and disclose in detail. However, there is no request for a recommendation letter, unless I'm really understanding this wrong. I give the floor back to you.
I might, when I looked at it, I might have noted if it was 21 or not. I noted that they were 2 recos, 2 letter of recommendation that were requested, that were required.
Okay.
So it's perhaps another section.
Yes, no, there is again, the documentation that is required is the 3 documents: proof of existence, constitution, financial statement. There is no, I can confirm to you, I don't know exactly where is that, but there is no other documentation that is required, no recommendations from any NGO or UN members or anything. So you don't really need to worry about that.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you.
No problem. Okay, I'm gonna take one more here. Okay, I'm getting. Let's see. I'm sorry, I see so many hands, and I hope I can do more, but we don't have much time left. Okay, I'm gonna go with Glenda Heckscher. Glenda Heckscher, you have the floor.
Yes, can you hear me?
I can hear you well.
Okay, good morning, Diego. Good morning, everyone. I just want to ask you, we have been part of this international association, organization. We are Mexican, we are a Mexican federation, and we would like to be in our own. But the problem is that every time I want to go into the site, your site, they ask me for my mail that has changed and also my password. What can I do?
Sorry, I will ask you. So you're asking for username and password for which purpose? I don't know if I follow that.
When I want to submit this application form to be part of ECOSOC by ourselves, they ask me for my mail that has changed, and I don't remember the password.
Okay. Now I got it.
What can I do?
Okay, so this is very important. Thank you for the question. That will help me because this is a common problem. This system, of course, has a username and password. Everybody has their own access to their own profile, and this is, of course, confidential and is between the NGO branch and the NGO. And username and password can be lost. There are different ways of retrieving this. The easiest way, there is an option to put forgot password, but of course I think that will not help in your case because this will send it automatically to the email address that is registered in the profile, and I understand you changed your email address. So the other possibility is to write to us. So basically you can write in the way I mentioned before. You will not be right with a profile because you don't have the username and password. So you will write in the second option, and you will say, "I'm, my name is this, and I changed my email, and because of that, and because I lost the password, I don't have access to this anymore." Based on the information you provide to us, we will give you access back. We may need to ask you more questions for security reasons because we want to make sure that you are, this is for your own security, to make sure you are who you are, and mostly that you would belong to this organization, because whoever gets that access have access to all the records of the organization. So, but in some cases you may need to send a letter signed by the president of the organization with a letterhead saying that you are authorized to do that. We'll have to see, depending on your email address and other factors, whether we need to ask you that. But the main thing you want to do is to contact us, send us a message through this messaging system in the Contact Us section, explaining who you are, explaining the circumstances you just mentioned, and that you want to get access back. And then we'll take it from there. Just make sure you do it into the category application for consultative status, so we know you are someone who is looking to apply. So we'll try to give you priority, given the fact that June 1st is some other question that could be some questions asking about the translation. So I restate that the translation of all documents in English or French doesn't need to be an official translation. I stress that because it's a common question. There is no other way. It has to be documents issued by governmental authorities. How long takes the approval? Again, I mentioned all the steps. It will depend mostly on the time we spend with the application here, based on the number of applications we receive for the year, and the back and forth we have with the NGO. That's our work in the NGO branch. Then the committee will be based on the number of questions they have and whether they are satisfied with these questions or not. Again, if you apply right now, and depending on many circumstances, the shortest you can get status, and again, this is just possibilities, I cannot promise this, will be April 2019. The other possibility, if it's not April, is July 2019. And it's important that you have that in mind, because the calendar of events of ECOSOC or other meetings has an influence. You will know that you will not be able to attend, for instance, events in March, no matter how fast you apply, because the earliest you can get is April. So it's good that you plan yourself that in order to organize yourself your participation. Okay, I'm going to have the last person taking the floor, and I'm going to finish there because we are already more than expected. It's a bit late. So, and then we will wrap up there. Let me see. Looking. Okay, I have someone named Sianan Russell. I think you have the floor now.
Yes, okay. I have two quick questions.
Mm-hmm.
One of them is, there's also a method to fill out a profile on the CSONet website. Is that profile content considered in the application, or only the material that's in the application? And a similar question is, you mentioned review of websites, but what about social media accounts? Do we need to be also aware of content on the social media and making sure that it fits, or will it only be the official website of the organization? Thank you.
Thank you. These are very good questions, both of them. So the profile, which is the first step on creating a profile in our organization, is a mechanism used by the UN and basically the whole Department of Economic and Social Affairs to gather information from NGOs. That means that the part that is for consultative status is only a subset of that, which means that only the first page that you fill out in the profile, which contains the name of the organization, the address, the email address, the physical address, and the websites, are the only information that is going to be disclosed to the committee. The other information is important to fill out to have information about the NGO for in the future, for events and for other purposes, but not for consultative status. So if you are in a rush, I will say that leave that to later and fill out just the basic part of the profile. And after that, you can move into the application form, which is it's going to take you a while to fill that out. Related to what the committee members look at, I really cannot tell exactly the scope of that. They look everything. Basically, the application form is the documentation they receive, and is what you submitted to the organization, to the committee. But the second source definitely is the website. But again, they do it it's up to them. They basically try to find information about an organization, and the first thing, if I have to find information about an organization, I have the application, and the next thing will be the website. However, that depends on each delegate. Some delegates will go to other sources, which could include social media, and it could include actually everything, even newspaper articles or whatever. So whether sometimes they make questions based on that. I will say most common questions that are not on the application. So most common questions are about the application. The second most common will be the website. The others are less common, basically because it's hard to substantiate questions on sources that cannot be confirmed. Maybe social media can be confirmed because it belongs to the organization if it's the account of the organization, but maybe not newspaper articles or what others are saying about the organization. But in terms of checking information and looking, everything that is available on the internet is a source for information. They want to know more about the organization. So that's why my advice to all organizations is consistency. So if you include information in your website that is relevant to the application form and you decided or you just forgot to include it, not to include it in the application form, then they may see this discrepancy and they may have questions about this discrepancy. That happens. That we get questions about NGOs, committee members trying to understand why the organization is saying one thing in one place and not in the other. And most of the cases is because the information is not updated in the website. So that's important to be aware of as much as you can. Is that answering your question?
Yes, thank you very much.
All right, thank you. Okay, so with this question, unfortunately, it's a bit late. I'll need to wrap up this. I really appreciate very much your time and different time of the day or night. Of all of you, we really have a very good audience in the type of questions we receive and in the number. We get a lot of people here. So important things to remember. The most important thing, June 1st is the deadline. Remember, the deadline is not that you cannot apply ever again after June 1st. It means that you cannot apply for the 2019, which of course I'm sure you want to make it for 2019, but if not, you can continue applying after June 1st. The important thing, if you have any question, first check our website. There is a lot of material and resources of what we discussed. This video will try to make it available very soon in our website. So if you miss some parts or you want to revisit some of the discussions, you can do it. There is also the video from last year available, which may have other information. Third thing, if you have questions specific about your organization that you don't see addressed in any of the resources we have, you can send us a message. Go to csonet.org. Go to the Contact Us section, and there you can write to us. Remember, category application for consultative status. We try to respond very fast, especially these days, because we know you need these answers to apply and make it to the deadline, so we are here to help you on that. All right, with that, I want to thank you again. I want to thank my colleagues here who really helped me a lot in managing all these questions and in the technical aspect of it. And I hope to see you after status around in New York, and good luck with your applications. Bye.